Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my February 2023 short story spotlight video. Well, technically I'm filming this video on the last day of February on the 28th, but I might push off editing and posting a day or two because I'm dealing with another big deadline today. So, competing priorities here. But I definitely wanted to get this out. I've been excited, although what I usually do with these short story spotlight videos is that I highlight literary magazines. And it's something I'm very into, and that's not what this video is about. I'm going to be highlighting and comparing two collections of recent Israeli short stories. But stay tuned, because in coming months I'm going to be doing more stuff with literary journals. I have it on my docket for later in the year, so I'm excited for that and feel justified in taking this video to compare anthologies. Or technically collections is the correct term, but anyway, I'll just keep moving from here. These are two collections of recently published Israeli fiction that's in English, written by two 20-something young guys. I've talked about them in my latest Am Reading videos. They are Jerusalem Beach by Iddo Gefen and The Man Who Sold Air in the Holy Land by Omer Friedlander. So anywho, Omer Friedlander is now living in New York, and I feel like that's why his collection is a little more well-known, I believe, in the literary short story circles, such as they are. And Iddo Gefen is living in Tel Aviv, and his collection was translated. But all of the stories, in fact, take place in Israel, except for The Girl Who Lives Near the Sun, which is easily my least favorite. So sorry, Iddo Gefen. So Iddo Gefen's collection, Jerusalem Beach, was published in the US by Astra House and translated from the Hebrew by Daniela Zamir. I mentioned my least favorite of his stories, so my favorite is 3 Hours from Berlin. In it, the protagonist meets an old classmate at some conference distant from her home. Said classmate has been living in seclusion for about a year, and he's drawing out a fantasy life for himself, which he puts onto Facebook. He invites her into his farce for a couple of weeks, and it's a rumination on jealousy and the meaning of life in our modern age. It's the type of fantasy that I've indulged in, at least, where I go off the grid and then pretend it's something that feels unattainable in reality. I think any of us who perform part of our lives online, including on BookTube, could understand this to a degree. Most of Gefen's stories, I think, deal with the realities people make for themselves in their heads. This gets into surreal situations, like radios that can broadcast people's thoughts, dream catchers that maybe alter people's minds, and companies that yank memories out of one person's head to put into another's, which makes a profit off of the human desire to be understood. This leads into a breaking of the fourth wall that Gefen describes in an essay he wrote for the Jewish Book Council. In his titular story, Jerusalem Beach, he imagined a woman with Alzheimer's insisting that there was a beach in Jerusalem, which is a famously mountainous city some distance from the Mediterranean. But later, a reader divulged to Gefen that there is a real Jerusalem Beach, in a manner of speaking. Geologists find the remains of marine life there in what was once a body of seawater. Gefen wrote, "The difference between fiction and reality is often much more blurred than it seems. A place I was sure I had created in my imagination had, in fact, existed many years before in the memories of others." In The Man Who Sold Air in the Holy Land, published by Random House, Omer Friedlander is also turning to a sort of metaphysical geology. In his acknowledgments, he writes, "I wanted to unearth the hidden stories of individuals beneath the fossilized official narrative." This points to the fact that his stories are a little less about what goes on in people's heads and a little more about the variety of disparate experiences for Jewish Israelis living in an oft volatile landscape. In my favorite of his stories, Checkpoint, he speaks to the clash between these different groups: soldiers, settlers, Palestinians, and peace activists, and finds a point of empathy for each. It's very much a pastiche to one of my favorite novels, David Grossman's To the End of the Land, especially for the conflicted mother/peace activist who is grieving for the son she lost in a war. Another harrowing story about war trauma is Walking Shiva where a mother and daughter are informed that one of their family members died in a war, but they're not sure who. Shiva refers to the 7-day mourning period that is required of all Jews that they have to perform after a loved one dies. And these characters end up spending that time traversing a battle-torn landscape, which is viscerally described. Perhaps my biggest quibble with many of these stories is that the ideas sometimes feel larger than the characters, like in High Heels and The Sephardic Survivor, which speaks to the complicated ways that the Holocaust permeates and is experienced by Jews in the modern Jewish state. Then there's The Miniaturist, where I definitely am on board with the character beats between the two main characters here. They are two Mizrahi girls living in a refugee camp in the 1950s. They came very much alive for me. But then I also wanted to learn more about their past ancestry in Barcelona. Gefen is currently writing a novel, so maybe Friedlander could join him, although he'd probably choose another topic, so. All in all, I give my kudos to these two new young writers of short stories. And you can find my Goodreads reviews linked down below, as well as a link to Gefen's essay in the Jewish Book Council, and I also have a podcast interview for Friedlander link. So that about wraps it up for me. Very glad to be tying the bow on all of my February BookTube content just in time to be overwhelmed by all I have to do in March. Although actually I'm pretty excited. I'm, into the second half of the BookTube Prize Octafinals, so I have to finish up all that reading, and I don't actually get to discuss that on BookTube until after the round of judging is over. But I also have my BookTube Spin book that I want to read, part of a TBR I made for myself at the beginning of the quarter. I'm hoping to listen to a book when it comes to me on audio that caught my fancy that was published last year. I have a couple of possible 2023 releases. Maybe I can squeeze in if I have time. And I'm also excited to continue crossing things off the top of my Goodreads TBR, the books that have been on the longest, and finally get to them. But you will see me here again in the next couple of days to do my March page 112 tag to add yet another book to my TBR for next month, so stay tuned for that. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.